everybody, and welcome to Psyched Out, a podcast where we talk about all things psychology, whether that is psychological thrillers, unethical experiments, true crime cults, and more. I am your host, Emily, and for those who don't know, I have a bachelor's degree in forensic psychology and a background in law enforcement. This helps me provide unique insight on some of the world's most famous cases, movies, events, and more. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the NFL. And no, I don't mean in like a cool, hip sports broadcast kind of way. I mean in a, hey, let's look at all the weird crimes that take place in the NFL. I've actually put together an iceberg involving crimes like assault, murder, fraud, all sorts of wild things specifically pertaining to players or former players in the NFL. Obviously, this is not going to be every case on the face of the planet. This document is already 34 pages long, so this is definitely going to be more than one part. However, if you want to show love to this video, to this podcast episode, or any clips you see on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, please do. That way I know this is, something you would like me to talk more about in the future, whether that's with a different sport like basketball, baseball, something like that. So the way this is going to work is I have broken the tiers down into just different, overall themes. So tier 1 is actually going to be titled conspiracy because there are a ton of conspiracy crimes that can be committed. And I will basically give a short synopsis of the person, their relationship to the NFL, and then the crime that took place. And depending on the crime, I might be able to weigh in a little bit on the psychology behind it. And I will most likely talk about CTE, which if you're familiar with football, you're probably familiar with CTE, and then how that kind of impacts the brain, and then why people with CTE issues have a tendency to commit crimes. So without further ado, we are going to jump into tier 1, which is conspiracy. Richard Alston was a very unsuccessful football player who failed to be drafted in the 2003 draft. Eventually, he was picked up by the Cleveland Browns, but he only made their, he didn't even make their regular season roster. He was very much not part of that team as far as that goes. From there, he was actually handed off to another league entirely, so he ended up not being part of the NFL for very long at all. Overall, a lot of people would say that Alston was lackluster not only in his NFL career, but also in his criminal career, as he was charged with conspiracy to sell drugs. Ironically, this gave him a longer prison sentence than his football career. He ended up serving a 14-year prison sentence. And it should be noted that he sucked so bad at selling drugs, he didn't actually complete the sale. He only got so far as conspiring to sell the drugs. So he sucked in a lot of areas in life, including being a criminal, which honestly, it's kind of hard not to laugh at, but I guess at least he didn't give people drugs. Next is Josh Bellamy. Josh Bellamy made it onto the Kansas City Chiefs team as an undrafted free agent in 2012. Playing as a wide receiver, Josh was pretty lackluster in his career as well, and ultimately accomplished very little during his time with the Chiefs. Obviously, the Chiefs are a very hot topic in the sports world right now. I think they're like 0-2 or something, and everybody's like, oh my god, the world's falling apart. Travis Kelce sucks, and Patrick Mahomes is a little wiener. I don't know a whole lot about football, but that's just kind of what I've heard through the grapevine. Josh Bellamy, though, was best known for being on the practice squad and was actually later drafted to other teams like the Chargers. Then in 2020, Bellamy was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and landed himself a pretty hefty fine and quite a decent sentence. In all, Bellamy served 3 years, 1 month, and had to pay a total of $1,246,565 both in restitution and forfeiture. For those who are unsure what wire fraud is, it's kind of an outdated term, but basically it's electronic fraud. It's like, hey, let me get you to open this email. I will steal your information, and I need you to give me money so that I can put it safely and securely in offshore accounts in like Belgium or something. That's basically what wire fraud is. So don't get too confused on that terminology. Next, we have Ray Kareth. Ray Kareth was drafted in 1997 to the Carolina Panthers to be a wide receiver, where he spent 3 seasons with the team. While relatively successful in his career, having received the PFWA All-Rookie Team Award, Kareth would go on to commit several heinous crimes. In 2001, Kareth conspired to murder his girlfriend, Sharika Adams, who was 8 months pregnant with their child. Having been shot 4 times by a .357 caliber, Sharika Adams was actually blocked in with Kareth's car. So he shot her while she was in a vehicle after blocking her vehicle in with his own vehicle. Basically what ended up happening is that a nearby nightclub manager and associate of Kareth fired 4 times into the car that Sharika was in. Now, while Sharika Adams survived long enough to call 911, she ultimately died of her injuries. After being born prematurely due to an emergency C-section, Adams' son suffered brain damage and cerebral palsy from surviving 70 minutes without oxygen in his mother's womb, which is actually insane. I didn't think that was even something that was possible. That's freaking... God, that's mind-boggling. So, I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically, Kareth hired somebody to try and kill Sharika for him. This was the nightclub worker and associate of Kareth. While not convicted of first-degree murder as he didn't pull the trigger, and it was the nightclub person, Kareth still received an 18-year prison sentence, which, first of all, dude, I don't know why you would pick, like, one of your friends and associates who's super noticeable to commit this crime, but you did. And I am just baffled that he would even do such a thing in the first place when she's pregnant. My guess is he probably just didn't want to have a kid. I don't know a whole lot about this case, so I'm not going to speculate on it too much. But overall, it is mind-numbing and baffling. And the fact that he only served an 18-year prison sentence for effectively enlisting the murder of his child and also girlfriend. Kind of insane. Next, we have Russell Erzleben. I might not have said that correctly. I'll just call him Russell. Russell was drafted to the New Orleans Saints in 1979, being the 11th pick overall. This was only the second time in draft history that a kicker had been picked up by a team so early in the draft. Despite this, Russell had an incredibly disappointing rookie season, which led to his eventual replacement. After retiring, Russell founded Austin Forex International, which later fell under investigation. Here, Russell confessed and pled guilty to conspiracy to commit security fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. After this, Russell was arrested in 2013 due to an alleged Ponzi scheme. For his first conviction, Russell received a 7-year sentence, and for his second conviction, he received a 7.5-year sentence. So basically, this dude was willing to commit all types of fraud, including mail fraud. Mail fraud is like the very, very, very old school fraud version of wire fraud, where like electronics technically didn't exist then. So this very much stems out of a lot of greed, and honestly, kind of an impressive record for being a scam artist. But again, it's just conspiracy, so how good he actually was at scamming people remains to be seen. Next, we have Irving Fryar. Irving Fryar was in the NFL for 17 years, which is an incredibly long career, especially for receivers. Because of this, Fryar was quite successful and landed himself on teams such as the New England Patriots. Due to his career, Fryar received a plethora of accolades, such as the Bart Starr Award. However, behind closed doors, Fryar wasn't that much of an upstanding citizen, having injured his hand by hitting his pregnant wife. Fryar also faced weapons charges due to a loaded handgun, shotgun, and large hunting knife being found in his car. The biggest incident, however, was when Fryar faced charges for conspiracy and theft via a mortgage scheme. This latest illegal stunt landed Fryar a 5-year prison sentence. So again, not an upstanding individual. Clearly he has had some domestic violence issues. And an interesting fact, and just to kind of dive into the psych side of things, the most dangerous times for people in domestic violence situations are when a woman is pregnant and when somebody is leaving that situation. Violence increases exponentially when a woman in the relationship is pregnant. Now, part of this stems from the fact that there is an increased vulnerability when you are pregnant. There is a lot more that you have to think about as a pregnant individual, especially if it's like you want the child, and in this case, she is heavily pregnant. You're going to protect that baby, which means you might stay in a situation that's not necessarily the safest. You might also not be able to leave that situation because you are pregnant and you don't have the finances or the resources. A lot of times what we see in domestic violence situations is you are isolated from your families, you feel like you don't have a legitimate support system, you get gaslit like crazy, and on top of that, your communication, whether that's through your phone or like emails, it's controlled very much by the abusive partner. And these sorts of situations escalate often into murder. And if you're willing to not only abuse your wife, but abuse your pregnant wife, the next step is essentially like murder. There's not really much more to go beyond that. So that's just kind of, I guess, a PSA on domestic violence, that it really only gets worse. It really only escalates. And it takes, I think, on average about 7 times before somebody officially leaves. And unfortunately, some people don't have 7 times to leave. So yeah, Fryer, not a great guy. He can go fuck himself. Then we have Sam Hurd III, which feels like a name straight out of Dr. Seuss. But Sam Hurd III played as a wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, and then later the Chicago Bears, where he played a collective 77 games. Sam eventually hosted a radio show called 1 Hour in the Huddle. His claim to fame was stained upon arrest in Dallas for conspiracy to purchase and distribute large amounts of cocaine and marijuana. Due to the crime, Hurd was given a 15-year prison sentence. This obviously was back in the time when marijuana was not legal in a lot of places. So it's a bit of an extensive sentence, but when we place it in context with when like everybody was freaking out about marijuana, it makes sense. We also have to consider the fact that he also had cocaine, which is like not a playtime drug. Cocaine can be pretty serious, especially if it's laced with different things. But again, conspiracy, so I don't know how much he actually ended up buying or selling, because conspiracy is like you're planning to do that. So in this case, he had planned to purchase and then distribute whatever product it is that he got for cocaine and marijuana. Now we have Derek LaVille. Derek LaVille had a 9-year career in the NFL as a running back for teams like the Seattle Seahawks and Denver Broncos. Over his 9-year stint in the NFL, he won 3 Super Bowl championships, which is actually pretty freaking cool. He probably had some seriously large rings. Behind the scenes, however, LaVille was participating in an international drug trade, international sports gambling, and money laundering ring. In order to get debtors to pay the money they owed LaVille and those he worked for, the people that he ended up hiring would ultimately intimidate and send debtors beheading videos. Overall, LaVille was charged with drug trafficking and racketeering, but only pled guilty to the racketeering charges. This landed him a 15-month prison sentence and a $5,000 fine. Now, what's crazy about this is that we actually see that a lot now. I've had to take quite a few reports where it's, fraud schemes, and people are like, hey, I'm getting messages from the cartel, and it's videos that people are being sent, and straight up images of like body mutilation where people are actually decapitated and like people's genitals have been cut off. And these are legit, like real pictures that are being sent to people. And so it's natural for people to kind of freak out. Now, the fact that he was doing this before it was such a popular scheme is actually pretty crazy. But it's pretty common when it comes to international drug trade and things like that. So very, very interesting how, that's kind of become more prominent over the years. I guess you could say this man in a weird way was before his time. I'm also surprised that he only had to pay a $5,000 fine, but that's probably because of the plea deal that he ended up taking. But not an upstanding citizen. Next, we have Michael Vick, who participated in the NFL for a whopping 13 seasons, playing as quarterback for teams like the Atlanta Falcons and Pittsburgh Steelers. Despite his long career with countless accolades, Vick never ended up winning a Super Bowl, which has to be pretty tough. Vick was also involved in a dogfighting ring and was charged with conspiracy related to dogfighting. This led to his release from the Falcons, where he served 23 months in prison, and then Vick was eventually signed to the Philadelphia Eagles, where his career continued uninterrupted. Now, this is something interesting that I want to talk about. First of all, if you are involved in dogfighting, you are the scum of the earth. I hope that your pillow is always hot. It is never cold. I hope the seams of your socks always sit wrong on your feet. I hope somebody pees in your Cheerios every time you go to have cereal, because dogs and animals and babies and kids, those should be completely off the table when it comes to committing crimes. Not that adults deserve it, but those are like the most bare bones innocent beings and creatures on the face of the earth. So fuck you for engaging in dogfighting. You're a piece of shit. Also, fuck the NFL for rehiring this guy, because what the hell? Dude has clearly shown a propensity towards violence and does not give a shit about anybody that is deemed lesser than him, whether that is a dog or not. Violence towards animals is actually very indicative of violence towards people. Now, it may be that playing football let him have that outlet, but also, I don't think you should be getting re-signed to any team at all if you have engaged in something like this. The other thing, too, is like, animal abuse comes and stems very much from this need to have power. It's a power dynamic issue. You are weaponizing a creature that is fundamentally inferior from you and getting it to do what you want. And you are reveling in this violence because, to a certain extent, this violence gets you off. It excites you. That's why you are participating in it. And you're getting other people with like-minded, psychological compositions to take you up on this offer. And so it's also fueled by greed. But overall, anybody, in my opinion, that engages in this type of behavior is like the scum of the earth, and I hope Satan freaking uses you as a toothbrush for his asshole. But that's tier 1. Tier 2 is what we're going to say is substance abuse, which, again, is very vague as far as that goes, but this is like talking about DUIs, whether that's through drugs or alcohol and different things like that. So the first person in this tier is Michael Floyd, who was drafted to the Arizona Cardinals in 2012 as a wide receiver. Floyd went on to have an extensive football career, even winning the Super Bowl, specifically Super Bowl 51. I had to look that up because the Roman numerals get really weird at a certain point, and listen, I may be smart, but I'm not that smart. However, this only occurred after Floyd was released from the Cardinals in 2016 for a severe DUI, wherein Floyd was found unconscious in his car in the middle of the road at 2:48 a.m. It was discovered that his blood alcohol content was a .217. Due to this, Floyd faced 24 days in jail, 96 days of house arrest, 30 hours of community service, and a $5,115.99 fine, which is probably one of the harshest DUI punishments that I've ever seen, because I deal with people that have 6 or 7 DUIs, and by the way the statute's written, they're supposed to go to prison, and they never do. So this is actually kind of impressive with the punishment that was received. But obviously this comes from somebody who is most likely is a career alcoholic, and addiction is not just for drugs. Addiction is also alcohol. For alcohol is considered a drug. So I think it's stupid that he was driving and that he got a DUI and that he was just passed out in his car. But I also think it's important to recognize that being an alcoholic is a very real problem and affects very real people, including professional athletes like Michael Floyd. I can only hope that he ended up getting the help that he needed. But yeah, it's interesting to see that, obviously this affects people that are very much in a different stage in life and different financial bracket and things like that. By all accounts, are basically a celebrity. So it just goes to show that alcoholism and addiction can it can affect just about anybody. So it's something to be cognizant of and to be careful of. And if you need help, please reach out and get help, regardless of whether you are a professional football player or not. Then we have Kevin Mack, who began his career in the NFL as a fullback for the Cleveland Browns, winning awards such as the PFWA All-Rookie Team. He scored 46 touchdowns in his career, and Mack would go on to score a 6-month prison sentence due to the possession, use, and distribution of cocaine. Overall, Mack was charged with cocaine trafficking, using a motor vehicle for drug abuse, and possessing criminal tools. Having pled guilty to a lesser sentence, Mack only served a month of his 6-month sentence. Again, this comes back to the whole idea of addiction, but I think an important distinction here is that he's not just he's selling and getting other people hooked on a drug that is addictive. And that's kind of where I feel a certain line is crossed, where you may be addicted, you may not be able to get the help, or feel like you can't get the help that you need or want, but then bringing people down that path and dragging them down that path to fuel your own addiction is where it gets a little bit tricky. Obviously, addiction consumes the brain. It gets to a point where literally that is all you can think of, and you will do whatever it is that you need to do to acquire your next fix. And in this case, that means even if you have to get your money by getting other people addicted and into a lifestyle, that is very, very unfortunate and very, very sad. Then we have Joe Cullen, who had an extensive career in the NFL acting as a coach, primarily the defensive line coach. In fact, he still coaches for the Kansas City Chiefs. I actually don't know how recent this statement is, but he's kept his career intact, but it remains questionable because he's made quite a few strange choices. one of them being that he passed out in a subway due to being overly intoxicated. He was charged with drunk and disorderly conduct. Cullen also was arrested for driving under the influence in 2006, and the most egregious incident occurred when Cullen drove through a Wendy's drive-thru in 2006 when he was absolutely stark naked. That incident led to a $20,000 fine, 10 days of community service, and an Alcoholics Anonymous meetings court-ordered. So basically, the judge is saying, hey, dude, you need help because you keep fucking up. And while I don't know much about Cullen's journey with alcohol, if he was successfully able to turn his life around, I very much applaud him for that because, like I said, addiction is incredibly difficult to deal with, and it's not something that's easy to come out of. But I will say, if you are getting more than one DUI, you need to self-reflect and change your behavior because it's only a matter of time before you hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. I do say it's interesting that he was able to keep the career that he had, given the history that he had with DUIs. But again, I don't know what his personal journey is, so my hope is that he did get the help that he needed and he was actually able to turn his life around, and hopefully he can be a good influence on people and encourage others to get help when it comes to alcoholism. Then we have Jim Irsay, which is a player for the he's an owner of the Indianapolis Colts, and he was given a measly 6-game suspension by the NFL after pleading guilty to driving while intoxicated in 2014. According to a toxicology report, Irsay had both oxycodone and hydrocodone in his system. Aside from the 6-game suspension, Irsay was later fined $500,000 for the incident. As for the judge's ruling, Irsay was given a 60-day jail sentence. Again, this isn't somebody who's necessarily a player, but he is the owner and face of an entire NFL team. I will say he got a pretty decent punishment, but as far as the NFL goes, I think him only having a 6-game suspension is absolutely asinine. Obviously, the NFL is something that is built solely off capitalism and money, so it would, I guess, be kind of a foolish expectation to expect somebody to get fired for this, but I think keeping somebody on who's exhibited this type of behavior is a way to tell not only fans and players that it's okay to have these problems and not get the help that you need, but like you can also maintain your job afterwards, if that makes sense. Like, oh hey, like, don't do that, don't take drugs and drive, here's a slap on your wrist, here's a 6-game suspension. But really all you're telling people is like, okay, do as I say, not as I do type of thing. Like, don't do that, but like, I'm gonna go do this on the side. Again, addiction is shitty, but at the same time, if you are going to be the head of an entire NFL team, the consequences for you, in my opinion, should be different from the consequences that, say, like a water boy has working for the team. Because you have a lot of influence and a lot of power, and being a prominent figure who is going to act in such a way, even with addiction issues, it just sends a very wrong and strange message. Tier 3, we have money laundering, fraud, wire fraud, and counterfeiting. And these are cases where it's not just conspiracy, it's like, oh shit, these people actually went through with this and ruined people's lives and got millions of dollars. So the first person in this tier is Will Allen, who was a professional football player for the New York Giants after being drafted in the first round of the 2001 draft. Playing as a cornerback for the Giants, Allen later moved on to other teams like that of the Miami Dolphins. Despite being relatively successful in his career, Allen was ultimately arrested in 2015 for running a $35 million Ponzi scheme that consisted of providing loans to athletes. In 2017, Allen was given a, 6-year prison sentence in order to pay up to $16.8 million in restitution. So basically he said, hey, you invest in me, I'll give you a loan. And then obviously that never ended up happening. And he managed to get $35 million in his own pocket by screwing young athletes. Honestly, people who run Ponzi schemes, especially to this type of high dollar Ponzi scheme, are very, very antisocial in their behavior, very sociopathic in their behavior, and it stems a lot from not just greed, but this sense of, I can manipulate people and I can get away with it. It's not necessarily narcissism in a way, but it is very much a representation of an ego where they've been able to manipulate people for a long time, and now they have finally gotten to a point where they feel like they can effectively weaponize it, and then they do so. So in Will Allen's case, he's very much like, oh, I see this weaker population of young athletes who may need loans. I can now abuse this. Having been part of the NFL, he's more likely to be trusted when it comes to something like this by a young athlete than, say, like some random Joe Schmo who's like, oh, I coached a high school cross-country team one time. He has a name, he has a legacy, he has influence just by his existence at this point, and so it's very easy for him to weaponize that and be like, oh, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but in reality, he's just shoving millions of dollars into his own pockets for nothing other than personal gain, and unfortunately screwing tons of young athletes over in the process. After Will Allen, we have Billy Cannon. After spending some time in the AFL, Cannon made his final career move by joining the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL in 1970. He retired after receiving a career-ending injury, which is very unfortunate, especially when you're not necessarily trying to retire. It's kind of thrust upon you. Now, despite having an orthodontics degree and having his own dental practice, Cannon participated in a $6 million counterfeiting scheme to pay off gambling debts. Charged along with others, Cannon served 2.5 years of a 5-year sentence. Having gambling debts most likely means that you have a gambling addiction, which is very dangerous in and of itself because then you run into problems of unsavory characters trying to collect those debts, and it can get pretty dangerous pretty fast. And then you get back into a corner of, well, I don't really know what else to do to pay off these debts. There might be threats on your life. I mean, I've never had gambling debts or been in that situation because, like, fuck, dude, I don't have that kind of money. But Billy very much did, and unfortunately, he went and spent more than he had. So it's interesting to think that he thought, oh, you know what? It's perfectly fine to just do a $6 million counterfeiting scheme, but at the end of the day, he was most likely very desperate to just get out of the debt that he was in because at that point, it's just going to compound. And who knows, you might be murdered because you can't pay people the money that they are asking for. Now we have Jimmy Hitchcock, who was drafted in the 3rd round of the 1995 NFL Draft as a cornerback for the New England Patriots. Particularly successful in his position, Jimmy led the league in interception yards throughout 1998. Jimmy was renowned for his gameplay, but his image would be tainted when charged with fraud, bribery, and money laundering. The charges actually led to a 46-month sentence accompanied by 2 years of supervision upon release. The little synopsis that I have for Jimmy is not super specific, so I don't know the details of his crime, but obviously fraud is bad, bribery is bad, and money laundering is also bad. Beneath Jimmy Hitchcock, we have Mark Ingram Sr. Mark Ingram was drafted 28th overall in the 1987 draft to the New York Giants as a wide receiver. Known for some impressive plays in Super Bowl 25, Ingram retired in 1996 before his legal troubles began. In 2008, Ingram was sentenced up to 7 years in prison with up to 5 years of probation due to money laundering and fraud. On top of this, a Long Island federal court ordered Ingram to pay $252,000 in restitution. Upon failing to show up in court in Kentucky, a warrant went out for Ingram's arrest, where he was found in a hotel getting ready to watch his son play in the Sugar Bowl. While he may have been a criminal, I guess he's at least a supportive father, but like also you might want to make better decisions before engaging in criminal activity, especially if you have children, because now you have to go spend time in jail and pay lots of money. So overall, not great choices being made by yet another football player. But yeah, I guess at least he's supporting his son. I guess that's better than some people. But, I mean, to be honest, as a dad, that's like kind of the bare minimum, so whatever. Now we have Art Schlichter, who played 4 seasons in the NFL for the Colts as a quarterback. He appeared in 13 games total with only 6 starts, and it was clear even then that Schlichter was suffering from a gambling addiction. His restricted performance and lack of appearances in the NFL were tied specifically to his gambling debts. Schlichter was so addicted to gambling, it's reported that he would often steal and con money from friends or strangers when he could no longer support his lifestyle. Due to his actions, Schlichter racked up over 20 felonies related to his gambling. In 1997, he was charged for forgery and theft, being sentenced to 16 years. In 2012, Schlichter was charged again for fraud, leading to an additional 10 years with 7 months of probation. So again, like any other addiction, it is tough. But gambling addictions are like Gambling addictions are scary because when you're addicted to drugs, yes, it's destroying like your life, your mental health, and everything like that. But the people you are buying drugs from don't really care about you. They just want you to buy drugs so they can make money. When it comes to gambling, the people very much do care about you because they want you to pay back your debts. So it gets to a certain point where you can be like stalked. You can be like I said earlier, all sorts of crazy shit can happen. So gambling addiction in and of itself is very, very scary. It is also a very easy habit to fall into. It's honestly not that different than people who are constantly racking up like credit card debt. You're living above your means, hoping that like, oh, well, it'll get better this time. Oh, it'll get better this time. But you're not changing your behavior to assist in the process of getting out of that debt. So once more, we have somebody else who's fallen into that system and like never-ending cycle of, well, you know, if I win big enough this time, it'll pay off all of my other debts. And unfortunately, that is not the case. We next have Ziggy Wilf, who was the owner of the Minnesota Vikings and was found guilty of fraud and racketeering. A judge deemed his and his family's business practices as organized crime activities. Unfortunately, the crimes listed under Wilf's name happened more than 20 years ago, meaning the statute of limitations would ultimately prevent any legal action. However, it's important to note that this is only one of many NFL owners who promote crime and bad business practices. Basically, this dude just got saved by the fact that he wasn't caught sooner, which is very, very unfortunate because, again, it's showing like, oh, hey, I'm the owner of this major NFL franchise. I can do whatever I want. I'm not going to get caught. I think that having him continue to be an owner was a very stupid idea. But I'm also not in charge of the NFL. But again, it just goes to show that a lot of it is about money and capitalism and who's going to pay me and how can I get out of this. It's not great. So next we're going to move into tier 4, which I labeled as miscellaneous because I didn't really have a good way of breaking this down. But that means we're going to be talking about stuff like tax evasion, drug trafficking, just kind of more niche crimes that I didn't really have a specific place to put. So first off, we have Plaxico Burress, and he had a very impressive career, ultimately playing 12 years in the NFL as a wide receiver. He even caught the winning touchdown pass over the Giants for the New York Jets in Super Bowl 42. However, Burress was given 2 temporary restraining orders that were later dismissed in court. He also accidentally shot himself in the leg at a nightclub and turned himself in, where he faced charges for the attempted criminal possession of a weapon, which ultimately landed Burress a 2-year prison sentence. Honestly, not the worst guy on the list. And I actually commend him for turning himself in after he shot himself in the leg, because that's got to be embarrassing enough. But then to just take the 2-year prison sentence on the nose, like, honestly, dude, you're doing better than the freaking Minnesota owner who was like, oh, haha, I'm going to do organized crime, but the statute of limitations is up, so, like, go fuck yourselves. So, Burress, to be real, keeping it a buck with you, dude, not that bad. Could have been worse. Underneath Burress, we have Joe Prokop, or Prokop. I don't really know how to say it, and to be honest, I don't care too much. But Joe played 7 seasons in the NFL as a punter, starting with the Green Bay Packers and ending with the New York Giants. While that sounds impressive, Joe was exclusively an off-season or practice squad member, and Joe would go on to be charged with tax evasion and fraud, leading to a 1.5-year prison sentence and a 2.5-year home confinement sentence, which is like really weird to confine somebody at home for 2.5 years for tax evasion. But I guess the IRS is like really serious and scary, so that kind of is beyond me. I don't feel too strongly about tax evasion, if I'm being honest, but like, come on, dude, pay your taxes. The rest of us do it. You're an NFL player. Come on, you make more money than the rest of us. Good Lord. Darrell Henley played as cornerback for the Rams, playing and starting in 54 games, while he played a total of 76. Not much is listed on his career other than the fact that he made 12 interceptions and 247 tackles, which is more interceptions and tackles than I've ever made. Henley is currently serving a 41-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder and drug trafficking. Some of you may be wondering why I've included drug trafficking in miscellaneous instead of substance abuse. And that's because in these instances, the arrested individual was not charged with using a substance or being under the influence. It was just that he had the substance, He doesn't have like a listed history of addiction. He's just selling people drugs or moving drugs for people to sell. Obviously, the conspiracy to commit murder is very concerning. You should not conspire to murder anybody. In fact, you shouldn't murder people in general. But the fact that he got 41-year prison sentence is pretty freaking baller, dude. Because some people would not have gotten that. Now we have Travis Henry, which was he was drafted 58th overall in the 2001 draft, where he played as running back for the Buffalo Bills. In his first season, he became the fourth leading rusher in franchise history with 3,849 yards and 27 touchdowns with a 4.0 yards per carry average. That is a lot of football slang, and I don't know what that means, but if you listen to football, that probably is pretty cool. To me, it's just a bunch of numbers. Moving from the Bills to the Titans and later the Broncos, Henry was ultimately arrested on drug trafficking charges. Henry was arrested after being involved in a multi-kilo drug transaction in Colorado. Reports indicate that Henry was the tough and ruthless money guy in the drug industry. His crimes have landed him a 42-year prison sentence. So, again, not necessarily somebody that, used the drugs, but was very much involved in the process. And what's interesting about this type of organization and organized crime is that once you're in it, it's very hard to get out, no matter what your position is. If you're an insanely good football player, there are a lot of powerful forces at play, most of which can be life-threatening. But on top of that, there's almost this feeling of anonymity of, well, I am part of this organization. I am one cog in the machine. So you almost take on less of a responsibility, at least mentally, for what it is that you're doing. Again, I don't know a whole lot of Travis and Travis Henry's case or anything like that, but it would not be, I would say, foolish to think that he was one of those people that is a cog in this machine. He is involved in this, but at the end of the day, he is only one person. Therefore, his overall impact on society and the network itself isn't that significant. So it kind of minimizes your overall, I guess, criminal behavior compared to somebody else who, say, is not part of a criminal organization and is just going out and maybe assaulting somebody. You are very much directly involved in that assault, and you're not part of an organization to hide behind and say, oh, well, there's 12 other people that also did it with me, if that makes sense. Then we have Tank Johnson. Terry Tank Johnson played in the NFL for the Chicago Bears after being drafted in the second round of the 2004 draft, playing a total of 91 games with 135 tackles and 14 sacks, while passing through a few other franchises during his career before being arrested in the Excalibur nightclub for possession of a handgun within a sports utility vehicle. While still on probation for the previous incident that he had, Johnson was charged with assault after verbally attacking a police officer. These charges were eventually dropped. Despite this, Johnson went on to violate his probation, earning him a 120-day prison sentence, though he only served 60 days in total. Honestly, I have no fucking clue what verbal assault is. I don't know if that's slang for disorderly conduct, but I don't know how you verbally assault a police officer. That's kind of part of the job, is you're gonna get verbally assaulted, so I don't know, it seems a little stupid to me. As for having a handgun within a sports utility vehicle, I don't quite know what that means either, to be honest with you. Regardless, he did some crimes and he did some time. Then we have Johnny Jolly, which honestly kind of sounds like a candy mascot, even though it's not. But he was the 183rd pick overall in the 2006 NFL Draft as a defensive tackle. Jolly originally struggled to find playing time in his opening season, but found himself with extra time on the field later in the season due to injuries of his teammates. After his time with the Green Bay Packers from 2006 to 2009, Jolly was charged with drug possession, evidence tampering, and eventually violating his probation. The evidence tampering came when Jolly was arrested for the third time due to substance possession as he tried to hide the drug from police. Jolly was officially given a 6-year sentence, but only served a total of 6 months. On top of this, Jolly was re-signed to the Green Bay Packers in 2013, despite having an extensive criminal history, which kind of seems to be a decent trend for the NFL and its owners, where it doesn't really matter what crimes you've done. Fuck it, we want you on our team because you're going to help us win a Super Bowl. This is a great message to send to children. It's fine if you just, sell drugs all the time. Don't worry about it, dude. You can still be on the NFL. I don't agree with it. I think it's stupid. I think if you have shown a consistent pattern of criminal behavior, you should not be re-signed by any NFL team. I understand that some people make mistakes, you might mess up, but when you have multiple drug offenses where you were selling drugs to people and then tampering with evidence, probably not the best idea. So I guess I can say maybe it's because it's like the early 2000s, but who knows? Who knows? So that's just my opinion on that. I think that's really freaking stupid. Now we have Ray Lewis Jr., who played all 17 years of his career with the Ravens as a middle linebacker after being drafted to the Ravens' first round in 1996. While being a star player for the Ravens, Lewis was a key witness in a trial following the stabbing and consequent murder of two men in the aftermath of a Super Bowl party. Originally, he was charged with assault and murder, but the charges were officially dropped when Lewis agreed to testify against fellow suspects Reginald Oakley and Joseph Sweeting. As a result, Lewis found himself on this tier, and then not on what I have as tier 7. However, what Lewis is guilty of is obstruction of justice, just because he kind of hindered the investigation. This is in part due to the white suit Lewis wore at the party remaining unfound. Basically, he didn't turn it over as evidence, and Lewis either destroyed it or hid it, along with the help of his companions. Lewis also admitted that he gave very misleading testimony to officers, stating that he'd never been at the party and then wasn't present for the murder, which we know and investigators knew wasn't true. Because of this, Lewis received a 12-month prison sentence and a $250,000 fine. Despite this, Lewis was still nominated as the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in the following season. Again, the NFL is just rewarding bad behavior and showing so many young kids that watch football and stuff. It's okay if you help cover up a murder that happened at a Super Bowl party. It's not a big deal. We'll still give you an award. I think that should automatically remove you from any sort of award ceremony. Yes, he did ultimately end up confessing, but it was only to save his own skin, because what we have here is what's known as the prisoner's dilemma. It's a very common interrogation tactic, where that's why in interrogations, if somebody is part of, if there's two people in a crime, you separate them. And you say, oh, well, this person's telling us all of that to save their own skin, and you're not doing anything to help yourself. What are you going to say about this? Are you going to defend yourself? And it's a way to try and get people to break their allegiances. Now, sometimes it doesn't work. Some people are like, well, fuck you. I'm not going to say anything because I know they're not saying anything. But the whole point is to put doubt in that person's mind. And a lot of times when there's not a whole lot of evidence, investigators will use this tactic and basically be like, well, whoever talks first gets the plea deal. And that seems to be what happened here in Lewis's case. Was he talked first, he got the plea deal. Unfortunately, this minimized the overall punishment for him, but granted, it did seal a conviction for the other two individuals involved. But not a great point of view on the Ravens' part for saying, hey, dude, want to just get this award, even though you were very much a participant in covering up a brutal crime. Not happy about that. Now we have Jamal Lewis, who also played for the Ravens as a running back from 2000 to 2006, and then later the Cleveland Browns from 2007 to 2009. Now, despite having the same last name and playing for the same team, it should be noted that Jamal Lewis and Ray Lewis are not brothers, and they are not related. Playing with Ray Lewis, Jamal Lewis assisted in a Super Bowl win for the Ravens. Shortly after this, Lewis was charged with the possession and intent to distribute 5 kilograms of cocaine, specifically using a phone to facilitate a drug deal, drug trafficking, that type of thing. This landed Lewis a 4-month prison sentence after a plea deal was arranged. So again, they're not related. Honestly, just kind of a weird circumstance. Also, maybe the Ravens should look at their hiring process so that they don't keep hiring raging shitbags of human beings that want to not only cover up murders, but give people drugs so that they get addicted, and then, oh, hey, thanks for the money in my pocket, as if you're not already getting a fat fucking salary from playing in the NFL. I digress. Now we have Dexter Manley, who played as a defensive end in the NFL primarily for the Redskins, earning a record for the Redskins with 18.5 sacks in a single season. I don't know what the average is. Again, I'm not super versed in football, so I can't tell you if that's like a phenomenal thing that happened, but I'm sure the football bros will say, oh, that's really cool. So in that case, good job, Dexter. Now, while Dexter is best known for graduating college despite being illiterate, which is actually insane, like good for you, dude, he was charged with drug possession and evidence tampering. The first charge landed him a 4-year sentence, while the second landed him a 2-year sentence, and then he actually served just a little over 3 years instead of the full 6 years. Again, not great that you're tampering with evidence, not great that you have drugs on your system, but honestly, pretty freaking cool that you graduated college while being illiterate. And like, remind you, this is during a time where AI is not a thing to help you. Dude did that on his own, so maybe not the most upstanding individual, but like, damn, dude, I gotta give credit where credit's due. Now we have Bam Morris, who played for the Steelers as a running back after being drafted in the 3rd round of the 1994 NFL Draft. Playing in 75 games, Morris scored 35 touchdowns. Morris was initially charged with substance possession during his time with the Steelers after he was found with 4 pounds of marijuana. From there, he was signed to the Ravens, where he was released again due to substance possession. And then, as if they didn't read about his legal issues at all, Morris was then signed onto the Chicago Bears, where, guess what? He had further substance possession issues. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Morris actually got signed by the Chiefs. He ended up pleading guilty to drug trafficking as well, which is not great. And the drug trafficking landed him 30 months in prison, where he served 2.5 years. Now, I understand it's marijuana, but back then, that was not the case. And the fact that we have multiple NFL teams just re-signing this guy all the time is a little bit concerning, especially if he has not shown a change in his behavior. So again, I just shake my head and go, hey, NFL, what are we doing? But again, it comes back to money and capitalism and what is going to benefit my team more. Who cares about shitty human beings doing shitty things? Now we have Mercury Morris, who played in the NFL as a running back and kick returner primarily for the Miami Dolphins with an 8-year career in the NFL. Morris landed a total of 3 return touchdowns in his career and played in 3 separate Super Bowls. In 1982, Morris was convicted of cocaine trafficking, and as a result of the crime, Morris was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He only ended up serving 3. He was released early due to a plea deal where he pleaded no contest to felony drug trafficking. After his time in prison, Morris became a motivational speaker and actively campaigned against cocaine as it had such a negative impact on his life. Should be noted, Bam Morris, Mercury Morris, not related. Now, while I think Mercury Morris made some very poor decisions, unlike some of the other people on this iceberg who did not actively change their behavior, I 100% commend him for saying, hey, I made really bad choices and decisions. These greatly impacted my life. Let me talk to people about it to make sure they don't go down the same road that I did. I commend that 100%, and it definitely sends a different message than, hey, I don't care what kind of crimes you've done, I'm still going to assign you to my team, and just send the message that, like, you can do whatever you want and break the law however you want. You can still make millions of dollars. So, Mercury Morris, you are an inspiration, dude. I'm very, very glad that you actually turned your life around and made something good out of it, because it's not easy to do, and a lot of people will not be able to do that. Now we have Nate Newton, who played as guard in the NFL for both the Dallas Cowboys and Carolina Panthers. With an incredible career, Newton has 3 Super Bowl championships to his name. Out of the 198 games Newton played, he started in 180 of them, which is incredibly impressive. Unfortunately, Newton was a very sleazy guy under the table. In 1991, he was arrested for dogfighting, which he very heavily contributed to. Again, you know my stance is on dogfighting. Fuck this guy. Reports state that he owned a total of 14 pit bulls. And if you haven't seen, I guess I haven't discussed how I feel about pit bulls. I like pit bulls. I think they're great animals. I think they're super sweet. I don't have problems with them. But when you have people like Nate Newton who have 14 pit bulls and put them in dogfighting and train them to be aggressive animals, that's why we get bully breed bans and why people like straight up kill pit bulls. It's not great. Not great at all. So again, while I said earlier that I think you're the scum of the fucking earth if you do like dogfighting or anything like that, that's why. Also because you're literally leading to the condemnation of a breed. after this wonderful human being, actually, I'm not even done. I didn't realize I had part of him on another page. Yeah. Anywho, as if dogfighting wasn't enough, Newton was stopped with 213 pounds of marijuana in his car, which, like, first of all, dude, that is a lot of marijuana. That shit is not dense. You have to have so much in your car. Then later in 2001, Newton was arrested for having 175 pounds of marijuana in his car. So he was like, hey, dude, I got caught with the 213. Might as well just do 175. Now, to clarify why Newton is placed here, whereas Vic was placed elsewhere on the tier list for the Iceberg when it comes to dogfighting, Newton was charged with dogfighting alone. Whereas Vic was charged with the conspiracy to dogfight, which means that there was actually substantial evidence in Newton's case that he did in fact do the act of dogfighting. He wasn't just conspiring to make it happen. Additionally, Newton fits into this tier because of the drug trafficking, because it kind of makes it a little more complicated and is a little more miscellaneous, which landed him a total of 7.5 years in prison, and he only ended up serving 2.5 years in prison. So, this guy absolutely sucks. Not a fan of him. Not a fan of him. Let's see. We have tier 5. How long is tier 5? Tier 6. Oh, these are some of the heftier cases. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to save tier 5, 6, and 7 for next episode. If you liked this episode, please, please, please let me know. I know I didn't talk a whole lot about the psychology of it. It's kind of hard to do when I'm just doing blips of cases, but when we get to like tier 7, which is about murder specifically, I'll be able to dive into it a little bit more, especially when we get to Aaron Hernandez. There's a documentary about it on Netflix and everything that happened there. That is when I'll be able to do a little bit more of my bread and butter. But just to kind of cover some of the psych topics that I did mention. 1, domestic violence. Very, very, very dangerous time for women when they are leaving, if it's a man that's leaving, or if a woman is pregnant. So if you know somebody who may fit into that criteria, please look out for them, advocate for them, do what you can to help them. Unfortunately, sometimes you can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves, but it's something to very much consider. In the case of dogfighting and things like that, that stems from a superiority complex and just honestly a cruelness and a propensity towards violence that I can't really explain. I can't equate it to a whole lot, other than the fact that you enjoy being in control of other things and then not only allowing violence to happen, but being the cause of the violence to happen. You have some sort of need and desire to watch living things just tear each other apart. And there is a greed component to it, but primarily it is this strange, off-putting power dynamic, and in a way, almost, not quite, but almost a weird little fetish about it. As for things like scamming people, wire fraud, things like that, that's very much just from antisocial behavior, sociopathic behavior, and greed, where I want money, this is how I'm going to do it, screw the rest of you guys. Very, very manipulative personalities. Not necessarily narcissistic, but they know how to get what they want. They have sociopathic tendencies. That's kind of the main psychological points that I have for these first 4 tiers. Again, it's not a whole lot. But again, this podcast is called Psyched Out, so I have to try at least a little bit to weigh in on those types of things when I get the chance, instead of just talking about the true crime aspect of it in and of itself. But yeah, that is going to be episode 1 for Greed, Crime, in the NFL. Again, if you would like me to do part 2, please let me know. I mean, I'm kind of going to do it anyways, but the more you show that you liked this, the better, is what I'm saying. But yeah, if you haven't already, please follow me on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. You can get the video content for the podcast on YouTube, which is Psyched Out, same name as the podcast. Instagram is official.psychedout.podcast. And then TikTok is Psyched Out as well, the name of the podcast. So go ahead and hit me up on all those social medias. If you have case suggestions and things like that, hit me up there as well. But as always, please stay vigilant, stay safe, and stay psyched out.